All right, so today let's go ahead and cover the digestive system and, just a good overview here. We're going to take a look at the functions of the system. We're also going to take a look at the main structures of the system. And again, an overview look as, the digestive system can be a little bit complex when we look at the types of enzymes and the way that we uptake and process the minerals and vitamins that are in the food that we want to extract to use for our body. Now, we will use a nice little convenient diagram that should hopefully be easy enough for you guys to draw. It's just a bunch of straight lines because one of the biggest lessons in this particular chapter is just knowing the pathway that food is going to travel throughout the digestive tract itself. So let's go ahead and crack into our slides. First up, we have the functions of the system, which, well, as you can probably imagine, your digestive system is to consume and process and use that food. So the first part of the digestive process is to ingest, which is to take the food into our bodies. So obviously we take a bite of that French fry or whatever and chew it up and swallow it. And so that is the ingestion process. We'll take a look at some of the breakdown steps of that and how exactly it processes. Digestion is the next part, right? So first we take the food into ourselves, then we have to actually digest it. Now, there are two types of digestion that occur within the GI tract. We have chemical digestion and mechanical digestion. So mechanical digestion is using mechanical forces to like mash up and grind food. Think like if you had a mortar and a pestle and you were grinding up some herbs or something or whatever, or if you just chopped up some onions or whatever, right? You're beginning to break down those materials into smaller and smaller pieces mechanically. So we'll find that mechanical digestion largely occurs in the mouth, right? Because of our teeth will grind up and crush the food. Our tongue will help to mash up the food, as well as coats it with some, saliva, which has some digestive enzymes we'll take a look at, and then chucks it into the back of your throat and then goes down to your stomach, where some mechanical digestion does occur, but that's where we really start the chemical digestion, which chemical digestion is the process of using digestive enzymes and acids to dissolve that food into a very liquid paste. And we'll take a look at all those little processes with a couple extra details ensue. Secretion. So as we will see, the digestive system can secrete various enzymes, various acids, as well as certain hormones that will help with digestion as well. As we remember from the endocrine system, we did learn about a few particular excretory hormones that help with digestion and all that good stuff. So we do find that the lining of the GI tract can secrete those enzymes. Then, of course, well, once we've broken down all this food, we want to absorb all the good nutrients out of it, which then we'll transport throughout the body and use for our cellular functions. Now, of course, not everything of the food is going to be used, so we're going to have some waste product, which we just finally exit the body with the process of defecation, aka poop. So, the gastrointestinal tract, which is our digestive system, that is the technical name, can go by another term. That term is called the alimentary canal. So as I like to say, that the digestive system, it's alimentary, my dear Watson. So as we look at the different layers of the GI tract, they're going to be very similar to, as we learned, with the layers of tissues. So as we mentioned before in previous lectures, I want you to remember that your tissue layers come kind of in a specific order, right? We have always the epithelial layer, followed by a connective tissue layer, followed by a muscular layer, and then nervous tissue permeates in between. And that's no exception here. So we have four walls or four layers of the gastrointestinal tract, and we're going to be looking at these layers from the inside to out. And by that I mean, if I were to reach down through my throat and go and touch the inside of my esophagus or stomach, I'm touching the innermost layer. which would be the first layer we see here, which is called the mucosa or the mucus layer. So it's the mucosa, and this is an epithelial membrane that is designed to secrete mucus and help to create that moisture that we want so that food and, well, everything can pass through a lot easier. So the mucus layer, the mucosa, is our first layer. And then right below that, even though, I mean, technically not below if you really think about it, but right underneath that is the submucosal layer, which is a layer of connective tissue. So we see first, right, epithelial tissue is our first layer. Then we have the submucosa, the connective tissue layer, which, as we know about the connective tissue, helps to provide the epithelial layer with nutrients, blood supply, all that good stuff. Then we have the muscular layer, which is, well, as we would understand, smooth muscle that, in specificity to the digestive system, helps to propel food through the GI tract. Now, this propulsion of food is a term we use called peristalsis. Peristalsis is what we call the wave-like contraction of the digestive system to help the food pass through. So it's almost like if I had a golf ball in a garden hose and I would squeeze the garden hose just behind the golf ball to push it forward until it finally came out the end of the garden hose. So the same thing here. Our muscular layer of the GI tract just squeezes like a toothpaste tube our GI tract to just keep the food moving forward. And then our outermost layer is the serosa, which, if you remember back to our basic anatomy lecture, the serosa layer, or the serous membrane, is an epithelial membrane that typically lines the organs within a body cavity or the walls of the body cavity. So in this particular case, the serosa is actually what we call the visceral serous membrane, which means the serous membrane that is covering the organs in that cavity. Now, as we've also learned back then, that the different cavities have different names. And in specificity to the abdominal cavity, we have what's called the peritoneum. So we have the peritoneal space, which is an enclosed cavity made by the serous membranes. So we have what's called the visceral peritoneum, which is the connective tissue, or excuse me, the epithelial tissue covering of the organs within the abdominal cavity. So this would cover, you know, your stomach, your small intestines, large intestines, all those things. Then the parietal peritoneum, as we remember, parietal is, think like peripheral, is on the outside. So the parietal peritoneum makes the enclosure. It lines the walls of the abdominal cavity, of course, inside. So if I slit my stomach open and touched one of the organs in there, then I would be touching the visceral peritoneum, which is the visceral serous membrane. And then if I touch the walls on the inside of the stomach, I would be touching the parietal peritoneum. We just covered that. The wave-like contraction of the GI tract that propels food is peristalsis. And now we pretty much actually went through this one as well, but we'll take a deeper look, as there's a couple extensions of the peritoneum that help to anchor our guts in place. So, as we mentioned, the peritoneum is the enclosure of the abdominal cavity. So there's a couple structures that we'll find here that, well, like we said, are going to anchor our organs. So first we have the mesentery. The mesentery, I think of like the hammock of the digestive system, because if we allowed our organs to just sit in our stomachs, they would just be a bowl of spaghetti. But the mesentery is an extension of tissue that actually holds the digestive system. And so if we zoom in here, right, we can see like these are the various dissections of the small intestines, and you can see how they're all laid out into a nice stack. So they sit high up like this. So that way, That way it's not just sitting at the bottom of the pelvic bowl and just being squished. So that way we have the organs suspended. So the mesentery, right, holds up our small intestines. Then we also have the lesser omentum, which helps to hold up the stomach right here. So this is the lesser omentum. And then we have the greater omentum, which is out here in the front. Now, the greater omentum is actually, maybe we'll find a picture later on in the slides. The greater omentum is a curtain of fat that sits below the abdominal muscles for, nutrient storage and, well, insulation as well. So one important thing to note here too, maybe, is it in the picture? I don't see it actually, but the kidneys are not actually inside the peritoneal space. They are just behind it. So they are in what we call the retroperitoneal space, or the retroperitoneal cavity, or we can say that they sit retroperitoneally. So that means our kidneys are outside of the abdominal wall in and of itself. So now we're actually going to break into the flow of food through the digestive tract and look at the various structures that help with digestion. So our first section of the digestive tract, of course, is the oral cavity, aka our mouths. And of course, we have teeth, as well as our tongue and the salivary glands. So our teeth, of course, are involved with the mechanical digestion. We all know that our teeth cut and grind and smush all of that food. Our tongue helps to, again, facilitate some of that smushing, but it also helps to, bring the food to the back of the throat for swallowing. And then our salivary glands helps to coat the food to start to liquefy it, but our saliva will actually harbor a digestive enzyme that, while it does not particularly digest in and of itself, it actually serves as a catalyst to our digestion. Now, the whole process of chewing up food is what we call mastication. So you might remember from your kinesiology lectures that the masseter, right, the chief muscle responsible for elevating the jaw, which would be to crush and squeeze the food, right? Masseter, mastication. So we're eating or chewing the food with mastication. So once we've chewed this food up and we formed it into a big ball and chucked it to the back of our throat to go, we have what's called a bolus. And so a bolus is, as we say, a ball of food, right? Bolus is just a ball of food. Now, let's take a look at those salivary glands, as they do help with our digestive process. So we have 4 total salivary glands, 3 different ones. So we have what's called the sublingual gland right here, essentially underneath the front of the tongue. We have the submandibular gland, which is just a little bit behind that, closer to the mandible. And then we have the parotid glands, which is 1 on each side. So that gives us the 4. The parotid gland is essentially on the cheeks there, as you can see. And so the parotid gland has the parotid duct that actually comes up underneath the zygomatic arch here. So that's why we want to be very careful when we're working around the zygomatic arch on our clients, because, well, one, there's, facial nerves and stuff and blood vessels, but the parotid gland is also right under there as well. So we do want to be cautious when working around the cheekbones. Now, so we've chewed up this food, we've masticated this food, we've turned it into a bolus or a ball of food. It's time to swallow it, and that is known as deglutition, or as I call it, deglutition, because you're taking a big gulp. So, as this food has now left the oral cavity, it is going to transfer to the back of the throat, which, if you remember from the respiratory system, we had various parts of the pharynx, which included the nasopharynx, the region of the nose, oropharynx, the mouth, laryngopharynx, which is, just above the voice box. So in that case, your digestive system and respiratory system share the pharynx. Now, hopefully, our digestive system doesn't necessarily share the nasal cavity, because oh man, does that stink when food or water comes back up out your nose. But the respiratory system and digestive system share the pharynx. But when we get to the voice box level, right, where we have our larynx leading into our windpipe that goes to our lungs, right behind that is the esophagus. And the esophagus is the soft tube that takes food to the stomach. So this is where, if we zoom into this picture, right, we want to make sure that our food and air are diverted properly, right? Air is going to go down through the voice box and then into the trachea, which will then go to the lungs. Food is going to go through the esophagus. Now, it is important to note that throughout this entire system, our digestive tract is just one long tube. And that one long tube is partitioned by rings of muscles called sphincters. So we're going to see a lot of sphincters in this lecture. And that's one step of the process as we look at the roadmap of the digestive system, especially with the drawing that we have up here that I'll display later on when it comes time. We just want to learn all the sphincters and then all the structures. So it's just a good bit of memorization of these things. But we have two sphincters in regards to the esophagus. We have the upper esophageal sphincter and the lower esophageal sphincter. Now, upper obviously is right there, high up in the throat. So this is where the start of the esophagus is, and then the lower esophageal sphincter is right where meets right where the stomach is. And so that's where weakness of the lower esophageal sphincter, allowing the acids to kick back up through, is where we get the the heartburn or the acid reflux, because we'll look at the structures of the stomach, right? Our stomach can withstand the acids that it produces, but our esophagus doesn't really like it as much, and that's why it burns. So actually looking at the stomach, right? So now the food has traveled through the esophagus, it enters into the stomach. There's three parts of the stomach. We have what's called the fundus, which is the uppermost region. So that would be the top portion right here. I think like if you were bouncing on a bounce house, it's super fun, right? You're just bouncing on top of the stomach. It's fun. And then the bulk of the stomach right here is called, or the central region is called the body. And then the very final end of the stomach is called the pylorus. So the stomach, as we mentioned, allows for the mechanical and chemical digestion. So if you actually see in this picture, we have just three different layers of muscle tissue, all going in different directions. Why? Because, well, one muscle is going to pull and squeeze in this direction, one muscle is going to pull and squeeze in this direction, and all of a sudden, and basically it's just to grind up the food that is in your stomach. And that's where you get that gurgly sound as your stomach goes, right, as it's just grinding and contracting and moving and squeezing and sloshing all the stuff in there, because that's what it wants to do, right? So just jiggle it all up, agitate it, get it dissolved, toss it to the next section. Now, we all know that when we eat, we get full, right? And that stomach expands. We're like, oh, my stomach's so full. Well, our stomach actually has these little folded sections of tissue that allow it to do that expansion, which is called rugae. So my typical little cheeky joke is that, if you're out maybe in the Bahamas or something, maybe chilling in Jamaica, you're going to do as the Jamaicans do and have some fun and eat lots of food, of course, afterwards. And, might even partake into listening to some reggae. And so as you're listening to that reggae and eating lots of food because of all the extracurricular activities there, then you might be thankful that you have the rugae to expand your stomach because of that reggae. I don't know. It's a stretch, but hopefully that might help. Now, we did mention that the stomach does partake in the chemical digestion, largely chemical digestion, but still mechanical in some of its nature. And we'll see that there are some digestive acids that we look at. So such as pepsin that actually prevents the lining of the stomach from being dissolved, right? We contain lots of acids that are extremely, extremely acidic. So as you can see here in the slide, right, that our pH, which, if you're familiar, right, pH is, the scale in which something is acidic, neutral, or basic. And so, acids, right, dissolve. And so it's a scale of 1 through 14. 1 being the most acidic substance, 7 being the most neutral substance, such as water, and then 14 being the most basic substance. So with the pH level of our stomach being roughly 2, it can dissolve quite a bit of things. Now, which, as I mentioned before, the esophagus doesn't really like that level of acidity, right? And it starts to actually burn and dissolve the linings of your esophagus. But your stomach actually helps to prevent this with, enzymes such as pepsin that prevent the autodigestion of the stomach itself. So pretty cool stuff. So once the stomach has churned food and dissolved it into a liquid paste, we call that chyme. And so chyme is the liquid paste in which we've now dissolved. And so moving into the next section of the digestive tract, we must pass through the pyloric sphincter, which is going to take us into the small intestines. And the first part of the small intestines is the duodenum. So the duodenum is our shortest, section of the small intestines. Excuse me, brain fart there. And then the duodenum, we'll actually take a look at this later, is where the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. Oops, sorry, can't click and highlight that. But that's where the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. Just right. How about that? Liver, gallbladder, and pancreas dump their digestive acid. So we'll take a look at the process there in a moment, but your liver and your pancreas, based off of their functions, produce a byproduct of bile, and that bile is recycled back into the digestive system to then help digest our food. And so we actually it actually gets dumped into the duodenum at the duodenal papilla. Which I don't think is, it's not on there. Oh well. The jejunum is the next section of the small intestines and is the second longest part next to the ileum, which the ileum is the final region of the small intestines. And then the ileum is where is the final part of the small intestines that's going to lead us to the large intestines. And then in between the ileum and the large intestines is what we call the ileocecal sphincter. So again, another sphincter. And we'll see all of this in one big placate here in the picture diagram that we have behind me. I'm sure it's later on, but it is important to note that the vast majority of all the absorption of nutrients occurs that occurs within the digestive system occurs within the small intestines. Roughly about 90% of all minerals and vitamins and everything in the food that we're going to absorb and uptake into our body happens here in the small intestines. So then we're looking at the large intestines, and the large intestines, also known as the colon, is one big, looks like a big sausage. You ever see those classic movies where they go to a deli and there's just sausages strung up on the walls and stuff? That's kind of what it looks like to me, right? So the large intestines, aka the colon, involves several parts. So here, the first part, so we can see here the ileum is the small intestines, right? And then we have the ileocecal sphincter. And then we have the first segment of the large intestines called the cecum. The cecum is just this little pouch at the very beginning of the large intestines, aka colon. And now off of the cecum hangs what we call the veriform appendix, or we just call it usually the appendix. And our appendix, loosely we say it doesn't really matter, but it does serve as lymphatic function. And there's some postulated theories that as we were an older species, it helped with digestion of raw materials like grasses and rougher materials and stuff like that. But over the time and our diets changing, it has since seen much use or purpose. But whatever. So then we have the colon to rise up, aka the ascending colon, right? If you ascend, you lift up. Then we have the transverse colon, because transverse means to go across, or if you transverse a field, you go across the field. Then we have the descending colon because it's going down. Then we have the sigmoid colon. And then finally, we have the rectum and we have the anus. Now, as we mentioned, there are some curves or bends in the large intestines or colon. So our first curve here occurs right next to the liver. And our technical term for liver is hepat. So this is why we call it the hepatic flexure. Think like it's flexing, right? It's bending. Hepatic, it's bending near the liver. Moving across to the other side, we have the next bend, which is the splenic flexure, because it's by the spleen. And we'll take a look at the look at that. And then we have, and it's not listed here, but we have the sigmoid flexure right here as well, by the sigmoid section of the colon. So a brief look at the topography of the large intestines here, right? Especially with the idea of the whole like sausages bound up, we have these things. So if we zoom in quick, we'll see that there's this tendinous structure right through here, and then this tendon kind of like cinches, almost like a stocking net, to like make these little pouches in the section itself, in the colon itself. So the little tendinous thing that's making the squeezing of the colon itself is called the tenai coli, which sometimes I like to think like tendon of the colon, if that helps you remember it. And then these big fat pouches that stick off to the side are the haustra, which I don't know. Sometimes I like to think about haustra to remember that is this big fat bulbous, right? And I think like some big guy from Texas, and they call him Haus. He's a haustra. I don't know. But anyways, moving on. We already had answered this previously, right? As we mentioned, the largest portion of absorption of the GI tract occurs within the small intestines. Now, like I said, we get into a deeper science that we don't have to, but as you can see, certain segments of the section of the intestines will uptake certain vitamins and nutrients and all these things, right? I mean, you got this big list of all this stuff here, right? And who needs to learn that? Well, at least we don't, but whatever. So the largest organ in the body, not to be confused with what I like to call the largest organ system. The largest organ system in your body is your skin, right? Because your skin composes of multiple structures that in itself is a system. But the largest organ in your body is the liver, which your liver is a powerhouse. It does so much stuff. There's 2 lobes, all these cool things, right? It metabolizes proteins and carbohydrates and fats, and it'll even store those, right? It helps break down old, and recycle old cells. It helps to, right, store glycogen and sugars and all this, that, and the other, right? It stores minerals like copper and iron. This is why a lot of people like to eat liver, right? Because of all the nutrients that it can store. We all know that the liver cleanses and detoxifies, right? It filters out the body of harmful chemicals like prescription medications, alcohol, all that good stuff. Your liver is just a massive powerhouse. And by doing all of this, it produces a byproduct called bile. And that bile is secreted out through it and is stored into this little storage tank called the gallbladder. Now, simply the gallbladder, not to be foreshadowed by its massively overproducing powerhouse of an organ, liver, the gallbladder is literally just a storage house for bile. We call it a cyst. A cyst is a pouch, a hollow pouch. So the gallbladder is nothing but a small little hollow pouch below the liver that just stores the bile, which then, when we're ready, we just dump it into the small intestines. But yes, your liver, pretty cool organ. And as you can, if we zoom into the picture here, right, very, very large organ right here in the upper right section or side of your body. So now we're looking at the bile duct system, and we'll just zoom into this picture here. So as we said, we have the ducts. There's lots of ducts that are all going to bleed into one, what we call hepatic duct, the common hepatic duct, right? So there's all these various little ducts that lead to the one. We're only going to focus on this. We're going to list the common hepatic duct, which will go and dump all of its bile into the gallbladder, which the gallbladder, the duct that leads from the gallbladder out to the main vein, the main section here, we'll say, is called the cystic duct, because as I just previously mentioned, your gallbladder is a cyst or a little hollow pouch. Then we have the bile duct here, whatever. It should be self-explanatory. Sometimes we call it the common bile duct. And then we have the pancreatic duct, because now your pancreas, does a lot as well, right? Your pancreas, involved with, producing insulin and glucagon and all this, that, and the other, and processing. It actually even like processes out old cells and stuff and recycles them. Again, that process produces bile as well. So the pancreas produces that bile and sends it through its pancreatic duct, which all leads into the common bile duct. All three of these structures, right? The gallbladder, the liver, and the pancreas all deliver their bile into the common bile duct, which then, as we mentioned, goes through into the duodenal papilla. Now, there is two, a major and a minor. We don't need to, have a headache over remembering it. Just the duodenal papilla is where the bile enters into the duodenum, the first section of the small intestines. And then we would get into the pathologies, but again, we already have that pre-recorded. So no need to take the time to do that. So let's go ahead and take a look at the drawing here. And hopefully, it should be relatively easy to follow and hopefully pretty easy for you to draw and redraw yourself. So as we said, and this will be a nice good recap of the system, the oral cavity, which contains teeth, tongue, salivary glands, all to aid in the mechanical digestion of the food that we're eating, to then throw it to the back of the throat, to then pass through the upper esophageal sphincter into the esophagus, to then pass through the lower esophageal sphincter into the stomach. The three regions of the stomach are the fundus, the body, and the pylorus. Remember, fundus is the uppermost region, body is the massive center, pylorus is the terminal end. Remember that the stomach also contains rugae and other various enzymes that help to, rugae is for allow the expansion of the stomach, and then other various enzymes that help to prevent autodigestion, as well as other enzymes and acids that help to dissolve food to turn it into what we call chyme, right? That then passes through the pyloric sphincter into the first region of the small intestines, which is the duodenum, which is my favorite word in all of anatomy. Side note, just a fun word to say, duodenum. But anyways, so right into the duodenum, where remember our bile coming from the various structures over here gets dumped into, such as the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas, right? We just talked about that, but we'll recap in a sec. So the duodenum is the first section, shortest section. Jejunum is the second section, second largest section, or the longest section. And then the ileum, which kind of looks terrible with my spelling there, ileum, which is the longest section of the small intestines, that leads us into the large intestines by passing through the ileocecal sphincter, which then leads us into the first section of the large intestines, which is the cecum, where the variform appendix hangs off of. Then we have the ascending colon traveling upwards, turning at the hepatic flexure, to then go through the transverse colon, to then turn at the pancreatic flexure, to then go down the descending colon, to turn into the sigmoid colon where the sigmoid flexure is, and then we're into the rectum where poop gets stored and formed into a massive hard lump, to then pass through these sphincters of the anus. We have the internal anal sphincter, then the anus, and then the external anal sphincter. And once we pass through that external anal sphincter, poop is in the toilet. We took the Browns to the Super Bowl, all the fun analogies you could ever put in to making a number two. So remember the bile duct system, right? Our liver has the hepatic duct because our liver is hepat, right? And then the gallbladder is a cyst, so we have the cystic duct. Then we have the pancreatic duct come from the pancreas, all leading into the common bile duct and then dumping into the duodenum. And that is your digestive system in a simplified nutshell. So hopefully you guys learned a little something here. We're going to end the video on that, and I will see you in the next one.